Hello, in less than 2 weeks' time, people here will go to the polls to elect their MP. All of the parties want your vote. And there is no shortage of issues on the minds of the voters, from money or indeed the lack of it for our public services to the impact our MPs make at Westminster. Over the next hour or so, I'll be discussing these and no doubt some other major topics with representatives of the 5 larger parties. And they are the DUP leader, Gavin Robinson; Sinn Féin's John Finucane; SDLP leader, Colm Eastwood; Alliance leader, Naomi Long; and the Ulster Unionist Deputy Leader, Robbie Butler. And that is our panel. But just before we get underway, a reminder that you can see a full list of all of the candidates standing in all 18 constituencies in Northern Ireland. Just search UTV News and we will have interviews with senior figures from the other parties on this week's View from Stormont. That's on Thursday at 10:45 p.m. Before this evening's debate begins, each politician will make an opening statement. The order of speakers was determined in a random draw. Each politician will have 45 seconds to state their case as to why you should vote for their party. First, it's Alliance leader Naomi Long.
After 14 years of Conservative government in Westminster and a decade of stop-go government in Stormont, there are plenty of things people want to change. Things that affect us all: health, education, our economy, the environment. And Alliance is leading change on all of them because they aren't just challenges, they're opportunities for positive change. A fairer financial deal for Northern Ireland, that equals more sustainable finances. Reform of our political institutions so no single party can collapse things ever again. That equals more sustainable politics. Together, they add up to a brighter future for everyone. Alliance is focused on progress and delivery. Just imagine how much more we can deliver with more Alliance MPs. If that's the kind of positive leadership you want, play your part. On the 4th of July, vote Alliance.
Naomi Long, thank you. Next, with their opening statement, is the SDLP leader, Colm Eastwood.
After 14 years of brutal Tory government at Westminster, it finally now looks like we're about to see some positive change there. But you need to be there to hold them to account. We have significant influence with the Labour Party, but unless you're there holding their feet to the fire on issues that matter to us, then it won't count. So whether it's about funding the health service here properly, a fair financial settlement for Stormont, or the recognition of the Palestinian state, SDLP MPs will continue to be there, stand up for you and be your voice in Westminster. So on the 4th of July, vote SDLP.
Colm Eastwood, thank you. Next, with their opening statement, is the DUP leader, Gavin Robinson.
I believe in Northern Ireland and I want success for all of our people. Some people can only see problems, but we stand on our record of getting things done and never giving up. Over the last 5 years, we have made progress, but with your support, we can do so much more. Whether it's help with childcare costs, more for our NHS, or campaigning for Northern Ireland, we are fighting for you. On the 4th of July, the choice you make will matter. If you want a stronger, more prosperous Northern Ireland within our United Kingdom, then you need to vote for it. If you want a strong pro-union team who will stand up and speak up for Northern Ireland, then you need to vote for it. Vote DUP and let's build a strong team for you.
Gavin Robinson, thank you. Next, with their opening statement, is the UUP Deputy Leader, Robbie Butler.
For this past 7 years, Westminster and indeed the UK government has been in panic mode, and unfortunately the representation by our MPs in Westminster, whether they haven't taken their seats or have failed to deliver influence for you in Northern Ireland, has been evident. And in fact, even locally, we have seen the biggest 2 parties take their players off the field and actually help the collapse of the NHS and heap big pressures on our education system. You need and deserve representation on those green benches in Westminster where people don't give up and they bring their influence to make Northern Ireland work for everyone in our communities. So on the 4th of July, you have a question to ask. Is it going to be more of the same, or do you want to make Northern Ireland work? And if you want to make Northern Ireland work, trust your Ulster Unionist MP candidates and vote Ulster Unionist.
Robbie Butler, thank you. And next, with their opening statement, is Sinn Féin's John Finucane.
In this election, you can send a clear message about what you want for the future. By voting Sinn Féin, you're endorsing strong leadership, positive change, and a commitment from Sinn Féin MPs to work hard for all. You have an opportunity to vote for decisions about your lives and your future to be made here at home. You are supporting better funding for our public services and rejecting years of Tory cuts which have targeted workers and families. Change will only be delivered in the North by working together in the Executive and Assembly, and to keep moving forward to a new and better future. On July 4th, vote Sinn Féin.
John Finucane, thank you. Well, let's start with a look at what MPs at Westminster actually do for Northern Ireland. Gavin Robinson, you, of course, with the DUP, had the largest number of MPs at Westminster representing Northern Ireland. You're keen to make the point that the DUP take their seats. But in the end, isn't it the case that you collapsed Stormont because you believed nobody in Westminster was listening to you? You've had little impact, even when you had confidence in supply.
Well, I don't think that's right at all. In actual fact, the reason why Stormont became a question was because colleagues around this debating table were unable to listen to the concerns of their unionist neighbours, were happy to upset the balance in Northern Ireland. We would far rather have not been in that position, but we needed people to take seriously the concerns that we were raising and advocating on behalf of the people that we have the privilege to represent. But our track record of delivery in Westminster is enjoyed by people right throughout Northern Ireland, whether it's the delivery of broadband to rural areas, where Northern Ireland
OK, but we're talking about the protocol, obviously, and the Windsor
We're talking
Framework.
about delivery, and the question you asked me was about delivery. And right throughout Northern Ireland, we have the highest connectivity rate, not just of the United Kingdom, but across the European Union because of DUP delivery.
But you collapsed Stormont because of the Windsor Framework and of the protocol, and then you reached a deal on the Windsor Framework, following the Windsor Framework. When, though, did you realise that that deal didn't do all that the party had claimed? Was it during the talks, after the talks? After you became leader?
It's not a case of that at all. We're standing this election very confidently to build on the progress that we have achieved. When others told us it was unachievable, when others told us that we could not make progress, we have acted in the best interests of Northern Ireland. And in this election, we're saying we want to build on that progress and get the job done.
But you had to admit right at the start you've had to reset everything.
You know that the direction of travel that was outlined in the Safeguarding the Union command paper is there for people to read. I would far rather more of it had been implemented today. But I know that the direction of travel is there, and I know that the government, in calling this election, and I'm glad they did call the election, sadly means that we won't see the full fruits of our labour until later this year. But let's be honest about that. It's very clear the roadmap is there. We have attained progress when others either did not care or did not try. And we are standing on our record of achieving for the people who elect us.
You oversold it.
We have a privilege to represent the people in Northern Ireland, and we didn't deliver the harm to Northern Ireland, but we're addressing the wrongs.
But you oversold it.
I don't accept that at all. What I have said right throughout this is consistent. We have acknowledged the harm that was created by a Conservative government that let Northern Ireland down. And whilst others ignore, dismiss or demean the concerns of the people I have the privilege of representing, we will work night and day to build on the progress that we achieved with no help from anyone else in Northern Ireland. And we will continue to get the job done.
We're going to move on. John Finucane, Sinn Féin's manifesto strapline, and you said it at the start of our programme yourself, strong leadership, positive change. That's your strapline. Where and how have Sinn Féin MPs demonstrated that by sitting outside Westminster?
Well, we are in Westminster on a regular basis. You're right that we don't vote, but Sinn Féin MPs, particularly in the last mandate, which has been dominated, as you've touched on with Gavin, it's been dominated by an issue of a Tory government and their fellow champions for Brexit playing fast and loose with the Good Friday Agreement.
But wouldn't it be better if your voices were in the chamber arguing against that?
Again, you've actually touched on the impact that, or lack of, that people within the chamber had. But where we were for the last 4.5 years was bringing our message and our voices directly to British government ministers in Westminster. We have meetings with them. We meet them on a regular basis. We also meet with shadow secretaries of state. I think there's been 3 in this last mandate.
But so does everybody else.
So our voices are clearly heard. But where else that we take our message, and I think that we have done so with a large degree of success in this context over the past 4.5 years, is to Dublin. is to Brussels, is to North America as well. So whenever you have a British government standing up in the very
this
chamber,
is a Westminster
if I can finish,
election.
yes, but I am an MP and I have been an MP for the past 4.5 years. So as an MP, when I see a Secretary of State stand up and boast about an intent to breach international law, with respect, nothing that was said in that chamber, no matter how articulate, was ever going to change the minds of those British government ministers. Where pressure was successfully brought to bear was when the American administration said there would be no trade deal if there was any damage to the Good Friday Agreement. That's the message that we had been bringing to North America consistently for years. It's a message that we were bringing to European governments, whether it was through their embassies in London or directly in Brussels, because, if I do need to remind listeners, we are an all-island party. We're a party who has had one MEP. We now have 2 MEPs. We have that presence in lots of different areas. And Sinn Féin MPs bring that message to that international audience, as well as providing
it's a message you're
first-class
talking about. Okay, well, let's
service.
go. Colin Eastwood. John Finucane makes the point that Sinn Féin arguably aren't damaged by not taking their seats at Westminster. What difference really can 1 or 2 SDLP MPs make?
But the public are damaged because, remember, between 2017 and 2019, the only voices really in Westminster from this place were the DUP's voices. I mean, we had Sammy Wilson, Nigel Dodds, Jeffrey Donaldson speaking up for all of us. I think it's far better that we're there, our voices heard. Like, we can all use our influence in different parts of the world. But John's party aren't in government in the south, but they sit in Dáil Éireann. They're nowhere near the centre of power in Brussels, but they sit in the European Parliament. Look, it's up to them. They're very honest about it. They're very open about it. But I firmly believe unless you're there, you just don't count. And if you ask MPs from across the political spectrum in Westminster, they wouldn't really know who Sinn Féin MPs are.
But what real difference are you making, though, say 1 or 2 MPs?
First and foremost, we've been the voice for common sense against the Brexit madness that the DUP were able to inflict upon us in those difficult years. We've been a voice for common sense and a voice to try and fix all of that. But also, I mean, SDLP MPs will always be there speaking up and voting for you. And in a new, and even with the Tories, we were able to bring in hundreds of millions of pounds to their constituency. Imagine what we can do with a new Labour government, who are, of course, our sister party.
Well, a new Labour government, if the polls are correct, it could be a supermajority.
Yeah, but
so
they're our sister party, and we have a
lost.
significant amount of influence with them. But their feet will need to be held to the fire, like any British government's feet would be.
OK, Naomi Long, you arguably are in the same boat as the SDLP. If you get an MP or 2 returned to Westminster, you would be a small fish in a big pond.
And yet we can make change, and we proved that. When I was an MP, I was able to deliver a change in terms of openness and transparency around our finances by changing the law. I was able to end the practice of double jobbing as a sole MP in cooperation with others. And I think it's important to recognise that unless you are actually there in the chamber, making the argument, taking the debate to people and representing a different position, the DUP have delivered in the last term. They delivered the chaos of Brexit. They delivered collapse of the Assembly. They delivered a very negative outlook from Northern Ireland. What I want to do, and what my colleagues want to do, is to project that more positive element of Northern Ireland, to talk about what we can achieve and what we can do, and the support that we need to be able to enable that. And I think that that more positive voice needs to be heard. We need to be there, though, because if you're not in that chamber and you're not standing up on a day in, day out basis, gaining credibility and making the argument, then you cannot expect other people to go out of their way to hear what you have to say.
Gavin, I'll give you a quick reaction there to what Naomi Long said.
The only reason we got into the position, and well she knows it, and well those sitting beside her who wanted to rigorously implement the Northern Ireland Protocol, was because they did not care what unionists like me, or the people that believe in the United Kingdom and believe in this country, they did not care for our concerns. And that is damaging. That is damaging for Northern Ireland. That is not how progress will be made in Northern Ireland. And I'm sorry that we got to the place that we did, but we had to do it when others refused to listen.
Let Naomi Long come back. Naomi Long, let Naomi Long come back.
And that is the matter of fact about it.
That is factually incorrect.
No,
they inflicted Brexit on Northern Ireland, which did not want Brexit,
we didn't
without considering, you supported it, without considering the impact, and you championed it, and you championed the hardest Brexit when the rest of us were saying that what we needed was alignment with the EU to minimise the impact and the frustrations that people would have in terms of trade. You argued for the hardest Brexit, as did your colleagues. And so it's unfair, I think, to create a problem and then expect everyone else to take responsibility for the consequences of it while you live in denial.
OK, Robbie Butler, Voters have until now chosen for the UUP not to be at Westminster. What makes you think they've changed their minds?
Well, I think 7 years of pain, abject pain for the constituents across Northern Ireland. There was the delivery of a Brexit, which the dividend for Northern Ireland is played out with an REC border, so that is delivery. But also we had the promises made in 2019 by the Alliance Party that they would stop Brexit and they would turn it on its head. So there's been a failure to deliver by some parties, and there's been a delivery which has cost Northern Ireland dearly with regard to that divergence between us and the rest of GB. I think we have been absolutely consistent on our record right through the debate about Brexit, about what the impact would be, and foisting those warnings. We share the same
really
position.
Consistent?
We
Have
share
you been consistent?
100%, without a shadow of a doubt. We warned about the consequence of Brexit. We opposed the Northern Ireland Protocol and the Windsor Framework. We have the same position, but the one difference is that we will not make the people of Northern Ireland suffer for the consequences of political failure, and that was the abdication by both Sinn Féin and the DUP to hold Stormont down. So Westminster and Stormont are both interlinked, so they don't sit in isolation.
Briefly, what would the difference be between an Ulster Unionist MP and a DUP one?
Well, it's very, very simple. It would be influence and positive influence. It would be making Northern Ireland work, and it wouldn't be the belligerent politics which I've grown up with, which I want to see changed. There are people and characters there who just will not change, but if people look at it on the 4th of July and want that representation that they can trust and that they believe in, that they will be proud in, I believe we can bring influence and serious influence to the benches.
Colin Meese, would you want to come?
I think it's absolutely clear that Brexit has been a mess, and most people now will admit that. But we have to also be clear that the DUP, being left on their own for those 2 difficult years, created a lot of this mess. They refused to sign up to a more sensible outcome from Brexit, and we lost votes by 2 and 3 votes in Westminster because we weren't there. That's a real significant thing. And other people who say it doesn't matter being there, they're still comfortable to ask Westminster to legislate for marriage equality, to legislate for an Irish Language Act, even comfortable to send the powers to cut people's benefits back to the Tories in Westminster.
Gavin,
so Westminster is significant whether we like it or not.
Gavin, quickly, a quick response to that.
Yeah, well, Vicky, we're very clear that there are people out there who are prepared to highlight difficulties, to complain about things, but do nothing about them. We have a track record of delivering for the people we are privileged to represent. We will build on the progress that we have made. We don't shy away from the difficulties of the past, but we work night and day to make Northern Ireland work. That is our position.
And just very
that's what people get from the
Just
DUP.
very briefly, John Finucane, Colin Meese made the point. Some of those votes were lost by just a few. Sinn Féin could have really made a difference.
I think that's a little bit of rewriting of history if we go back and actually look at the outworking of what the British government were intent on doing. There wasn't a single vote that was going to stop the Brexit project. And I think that when we have a chamber that by its very nature is designed to make MPs from here irrelevant, the real work gets done when we engage with them directly, and that's what we've been doing.
OK, we're going to take a short break now. When we come back, we will be discussing the party's demands for more money to fix our public services, but how much more do we need and how will we spend it? Do stay with us. Hello again, welcome back to the UTV election debate. With me in the studio are representatives of the 5 larger parties. Next, we're going to take a look at the state of our finances. So, John Finucane, in the Sinn Féin manifesto, you set out your demand for more fiscal powers to be devolved to Stormont, but the executive is struggling to manage the budget right now. Why would they be trusted with more powers?
Well, I think if we believe in devolution, and I would like to think that all of the parties that are represented at the executive table do, then we should be given the powers to actually equip us to deliver in all of our respective departments. There was a very stark admission by the British government last year that this place has been underfunded for years. A lot of us, including Sinn Féin, have been saying this for a long time. But to have that analysis endorsed by the British government is significant. So I think with respect, all departments are struggling to implement the work that they need to implement to help workers, to help families with the limited budget that is available. So what we need is that collective voice pushing back against the Treasury, pushing back against Westminster and demanding the bare minimum resources that we need to improve, particularly public resources like health and education.
But the Fiscal Council has said in its last report that the combination of reduced executive oversight over a number of years and Assembly scrutiny as well as the Barnett squeeze and rising funding pressures, resulted in departments being overspent, even before ministers left office?
I think there's a contradiction almost in this, that we as an assembly can be criticised, sometimes fairly so, in how public money is spent. And there's a criticism usually coming from London as to we need to do better with our money. But if we are going to have a devolved institution that actually can raise money, then we need to be given the powers to do so. We need to have that ability.
Decisions have to be made about that, about raising money, revenue raising, for example.
Yes,
everyone is
absolutely.
dodging that.
And what we are firmly against, I think, to be fair, where we in particularly will dodge is the lazy narrative, usually coming from a Tory party, that we must punish and inflict cost on those who are least able to afford it, whether that is water charges or prescription charges. There are other options available, and what we have been very clear, our Economy Minister Conor Murphy, our Finance Minister Caoimhe Archibald, is that we want the powers so that we can, yes, but they would be the people who would be implementing such powers.
Well,
what we want is the powers from Westminster, that we can have more decisions taken about our future here by the people here.
OK, well, you've talked there about, Tory austerity. Of course, Robbie, on the Assembly, of course, it's the Ulster Unionists who have refused to back the budget. The Health Minister even implying he's prepared to overspend. Where's the responsibility in that, given that the financial package we have is linked to a responsible budget?
But it's very clear that the 5 years that Stormont was down, the health service in particular suffered without that leadership for transformation, and transformation doesn't come without cost. And if we want to see an efficient service with cost savings, we need stable and credible government, and we just haven't had that. But the Ulster Unionist Party never duck the opportunity to take health. It's a significant portfolio. But when you look at the allocation of money in the budget, you can see a number of offices that didn't see a reduction. In fact, the Executive Office and the Department of Finance saw an increase in their budget, and we just don't think that's fair, and certainly we're not part of that conversation.
This is about responsibility, about having to work with what you have.
So we have responsibility for the health portfolio, and it's very clear that hundreds of millions of pounds short is going to cause harm to the people of Northern Ireland. We don't think there was a fair allocation, and we're working with our executive partners to see that remedied, and we want to see it remedied as quickly as possible. But we see no contradiction in our position. But if you don't get it remedied,
are you still prepared to bust the budget?
Well, let me be very clear about this. When the two biggest parties walked away from government and left us without a health minister, that's not where the Ulster Unionist Party will be. The people in Northern Ireland deserve clear leadership, unambiguous prioritisation of that, and that's what we will deliver. OK,
Naomi Long, your manifesto also calls for more fiscal powers to be given to Stormont. In your manifesto, you suggest to maximise the budget, reform is needed. You say that there should be a review of existing and potential revenue-raising options. So you're up for water charges, higher rates, prescription charges?
What we've talked about is potential revenue-raising measures, and we already have supported in the past a number of ways. For example, in my department, we do cost recovery on many of the services that we offer, because it's important that we are prudent with the money that we have. But we have to start at the beginning of this. Northern Ireland is underfunded. That has been now accepted by the UK government, and it has been accepted by the Fiscal Commission. So we need to redress that balance. We then need to use some of that resource to invest in transformation of services, because, for example, with health, the trajectory on which health is currently means that if we were to spend all of our block grant on health, we would still have a gap at the end in terms of service. So we've got to do the transformation piece. We argued very strongly during the restoration process that we needed specific funding for transformation, and that pot of money is now available and people are bidding into that. But we also need to work with the UK government to look at finances more generally. The fiscal arrangements and the fiscal rules in the UK do not allow for long-term investment in projects that are needed for infrastructure and for tackling climate change. And for Northern Ireland to be able to do those things reasonably requires that we change the fiscal structures. But there can be no escaping the reality that when we get that money, we have to be accountable for how we spend it. We can't overspend, we can't waste, and we need to look, before we start dipping into the pockets of hard-pressed members of the public, we need to look at the money that is wasted on the costs of division in our society, and we need to unlock those to invest in services that will make a real difference.
But decisions have to be made. That's
decisions have to be made, but also we have to have an assembly in Northern Ireland that actually functions all the time, and that's why we're arguing very strongly for reform of our institutions, so that we don't go through these cycles of collapse where there is no one actually steering the ship, even when we're in choppy waters.
OK, Colm Eastwood, you've made a thing about your relationship with Labour. The bottom line is, though, Keir Starmer and the Shadow Secretary of State, Hilary Benn, if they are to come into government, they have made it clear there is no money tree for Northern Ireland.
Well, of course, the Tories have wrecked the place. They've wrecked the economy. They've wrecked individuals and family finances.
We might be facing Labour austerity, not just Tory.
Well, let's make sure that we're there to hold them to account for a better deal for Northern Ireland. But let's just be honest. The impact of all of this is that our health service has all but collapsed. People I know are going to the credit union so that they can fund private healthcare. These are people who've worked all their lives and don't have that money. And why has that happened? Largely because we had 5 years where parties walked off the pitch, didn't go to work and weren't doing their job
but
to fix the health service.
But also because the parties won't make decisions.
Well, exactly. Decisions do need to be taken. But where are the decisions taken around taxes? Where are the decisions taken around how our budgets in health and all the other budgets in the public sector are paid for or come from? Westminster. So unless you're there, you don't count. That's why we have to go there, make the case. And as I've said, look, we're obviously very close to the Labour Party, but we have to hold them to account, because whilst we would love to see more fiscal powers in Northern Ireland, the powers right now rest in London. So we've got to go there. As much as I don't want to, we've got to go there, hold them to account and speak up for people.
Hold them to account, but Hilary Benn himself, in an interview with UTV, did not rule out the need for revenue raising here.
Well, there's lots of ways you can raise revenue. I had a private member's bill in the last Parliament which would have taxed oil and gas polluters and put money back into people's pockets. That's the kind of thing that we need to be thinking about. But we were never going to get that under the Tories. But in order to push Labour into the right direction, you've got to be there, working every day. It's hard work, and sending a message is great, but you've also got to send hard working MPs who are prepared to be there and do that hard slog. That's the only thing that counts.
OK. Gavin Robinson, we haven't seen the DUP's manifesto for this election yet. Would you want more fiscal powers for Stormont?
Well, you will see very clearly a lot in our manifesto when it's published tomorrow about support for hard-pressed working families. And when you consider that as a consequence of coronavirus and a consequence of the difficulties of the last number of years, people at home now have a greater tax burden on them than at any time post-Second World War. I'm not sure that there's a strong appetite there to hear about more fiscal devolution, which means more revenue raising, which means more difficulty for hard-pressed working families. So what are we in the business of? We're in the business of supporting individuals in Northern Ireland and supporting Northern Ireland. When I started the campaign to get a needs assessment and a recognition of the need for delivery of public services in Northern Ireland at Westminster, it was a very lonely road to tread, Vicky. But I'm pleased that in the course of over a year and a half, we got the parties here this afternoon, here this evening, agreeing that it was something that needed to be pushed, and we got tangible product for Northern Ireland. There was £950 additional million to allocate just 2 months ago.
But what have we not heard? If the decisions are not being made.
What have we not heard? Exactly that. Have you seen a reform plan from the Department of Health? Because I haven't.
Well, there's no programme for government either.
I did hear a Minister of Health a couple of weeks ago indicate that within 2 weeks' time they would be outlining all of their great plans for the Department of Health, and yet we haven't seen it. And I don't dismiss the challenges that are there, but there is a need for political maturity about recognising, one, Northern Ireland needs to be funded at the level sufficient for public services, and two, political realism to come in for the choices to be made.
Please let Robbie Butler come back on what Gavin was saying there.
Yeah, I think when anybody's going to speak in terms of health and the well-being of the population of Northern Ireland, there's not going to be too many will be putting their store in a party which walked away from the executive here and collapsed Stormont on the basis of something that they have delivered, which is an REC border. And that's really
5 months, no plan.
And Gavin spoke about, what came off the confidence supply, which was the broadband deal. Well, you know what emails people are getting is that they can't get their products and they can't get their machinery from across the water. So it's great having internet,
do nothing about it, Robbie.
It's not good at the consequence of having an REC border, but people trust the Ulster Unions with health. And I have 20 years experience in public service before politics that equips me well to understand when there is political failure, the pressures that takes on the frontline workers, which is something that will be a priority for us.
Okay, Naomi Long.
But political maturity also requires us to be able to take some difficult decisions. And unfortunately, every time that we try for transformation, there will be a campaign to stop us making those changes. And political parties will join behind them if it happens to be another minister from another party who's bringing those forward. We're the only party who have argued consistently for that change and have backed change in the health service, whether it was us leading it or not, because we actually believe in responsible responsible government. It has to be done, but it's also unfair to say that we can have public services and not invest in them. We don't have to tax necessarily those hard-pressed families, but we can tackle the kind of tax evasion and tax avoidance that happens with the super rich in our society who get away without paying their dues. We can tax those corporations and companies who engage in schemes to offshore their profits so that we can invest that money in our public services, because the investment is needed. And when it comes to health, I understand the challenges for the health service, but health is not just about the Department of Health. It's about good housing, it's about good nutrition, it's about reducing demand in the service, and that requires us to invest in a whole suite of things that will support people in making their own health better.
OK, there we must leave it for now. Still to come, it's the conversation Nationalists say Unionists need to take part in. Unionists say it's a non-runner. Will the next government consider a border poll? We'll be back shortly. Hello again, you're with the UTV election debate. We are turning to the discussion Nationalists say has already started, the push for a border poll, but there is no move in unionism to take part. Colin Eastwood, of course, you've made it very clear as a nationalist you want a united Ireland. How do you convince a unionist that's the way forward?
Well, so I set up a New Ireland Commission, which has been talking to people from right across the political spectrum. Lots of unionists are talking to us, by the way, over their fears and their concerns and what they want to see in the future. But for me, I want that conversation to be a process of reconciliation, where we explain to people that we can unite these communities again, we can bring people together, we can give people a better chance in life, a better economic outlook, better public services. I think that's a prize worth having. And being part of the European Union, again, I think no matter who you are, no matter what your background is, we have to understand this is not about fixing historic wrongs. This is about building a future together. I believe that will be a case that will be well received from people right across our communities. But we have to do that work. We have to work really, really hard to convince people that the future that I want for my two daughters is one that they can share in as well. OK, you've spoken there about your New Ireland Commission and the number of unionists that you say you've spoken to in recent times. How many minds have you changed? Well, hard to tell, but we're working on it. And I think it's important that we have that discussion. We can't keep shouting at each other over walls. This is the future of our society that we're talking about. I have a strong belief in what I think that should look like. Gavin has a different belief. But somewhere in the middle, we can have a democratic discussion where I think, frankly, everybody should be part of. And I think all parties should begin to think about when they're going to take a position around this, because this will come a lot quicker than people think. I don't think it'll happen in the next few years, but not far beyond that. We're going to have this discussion, and we either have it in a way that's respectful or we have it in a very adversarial way. My view is the best kind of way that we have this discussion is one where the principle of reconciliation is at the heart of it, and the huge opportunities that I can see as being part of an all-Ireland economy will be one that people can embrace.
OK, Naomi Long, this, some would argue, is a conversation that you avoided by not going to the Ireland's Future event last weekend.
No, I don't think that's fair at all. I mean, my time is at a premium during an election campaign and I was out with candidates. The party was represented. Nuala McAllister went along and engaged in that conversation, and we've been to previous events and no doubt we'll be at future events, because whatever the future for the constitutional position of Northern Ireland, we want to be part of that conversation because it will be our future as much as anyone else's. The important thing though for me is that first and foremost, as politicians, we won't be the people who make those decisions. It will be the public who make those decisions in the ballot box in a referendum, and so they can vote without worrying about the constitutional question when it comes to elections, because that's not what we will be actually delivering for them. When it comes to when that will happen, I think the best time for any decision to be made is when we have a proposition, and the problem at the moment is there is no proposition. There is no clarity about what it will offer and how it will work, and that's the conversation that we're in interested in engaging in, but it's one that we have previously said we believe academics and those economists who are involved in this conversation can actually come together and bring together a proposition. We saw with Brexit what happens when you vote in the dark, when you don't know what the outcome will mean, and we saw the consequences of that. For me, the most important project that I can influence right now is that project within Northern Ireland of building a shared community, because we can't have a truly united Ireland or a truly united kingdom unless we have a united community here in Northern Ireland.
OK, John Finucane, at the Ireland Future event, the former Taoiseach Leo Varadkar said, I think if we're going to start to change minds and hearts among Protestant people, a much more stronger, specific apology for what was done would help to change the hearts and minds. Isn't there now a case for that kind of apology from Republicans?
Well, I think Republicans have not been found wanting when it comes to reconciliation. This conversation is about a new Ireland and the former Taoiseach Leo Varadkar's
But it's about getting there, about convincing people and bringing them along.
Yes, absolutely. And this is a conversation that does not solely belong to Republicans. It belongs to every single person on this island. And I think Mr Varadkar's contribution to the Ireland's Future debate was very thoughtful. I think it was also very significant where he impressed upon the Irish government to make reunification and to take the preparatory steps for that, to make that a political obligation rather than aspiration.
Talking about an apology,
was very significant. Well, as I say, reconciliation is something that runs alongside this. But this is a conversation that needs to be advanced, and it needs to be advanced by an Irish government, which I think, with respect, up to now has paid it lip service, because the conversation has taken place. Political parties are doing their work on that. Academia, economists, trade unions. We saw all of that represented at the Ireland's Future event and other events over the past number of years.
It's for others to take responsibility for their actions, but is it now time for Republicans to take responsibility?
Well, I think with respect they have. I mean, you're venturing into a different conversation, which started off as around what a new Ireland would look like.
But to get to a new Ireland, you need to
bring everybody along. What I won't do, as somebody who has been directly impacted by the Troubles, is expect or demand reconciliation or forgiveness from anyone for any action that has ever taken place. That's a separate conversation. It's a personal conversation, and it's something that is very emotive, and I would say should be divorced at the right time from this conversation, which is about looking towards the future. It's about building something new, and in that regard, Sinn Féin have a very important voice and role to play in this, but it's not a conversation or debate that we own, nor should we. Okay. This is a conversation that belongs to everybody else, and whether you look at the economy, whether you look at health or education, that all-island modelling of what a new Ireland could look like is not just incredibly exciting, but it offers so much potential.
Robbie Butler, have you heard anything in recent times that would convince you as a unionist to consider constitutional change?
Well, I haven't, and I think it's interesting that there are a number of bodies that have not come together in regard to the nationalist Republican family. There are maybe about 3 different forums that don't seem to have the same vision for what their aspiration might be. As a unionist, it is my responsibility to see Northern Ireland work, to see Northern Ireland thrive, and I'm not picking up anything, certainly from the unionist community and even from many in the nationalist community who are not having that conversation at the moment. And that's not to diminish the rights of the SDLP or Sinn Féin or any other to take part in those conversations, but I'm not picking up any sense that we're at that point. And in fact, my priority will be to have the alternative conversation, which is to make Northern Ireland the most prosperous place in the United Kingdom and indeed on these islands. And I can see no direction that where the diminishment of my Britishness or Northern Ireland will actually work in the interests of the people of this island or indeed the UK.
Is this place is a basket case economically. The health service has almost collapsed. We need to talk about the future. I don't think any of us can cop out from this conversation. I have a particular view, you have a view. Why are we not having a democratic discussion? And if you want to sell me on the future within the United Kingdom, what is unionism doing actually to sell the United Kingdom? Because the last few years, frankly, this place has been wrecked because of Brexit and all the misadventures of unionism.
Colin's point, I think, we wouldn't disagree with where we got to in 1998, but unfortunately since 1998 we've seen a division of power that moved very much into the hands of Sinn Féin and DUP. So Northern Ireland didn't get a chance. It's moved on incredibly incredibly well. We had a discussion earlier about our memories, actually, and what Northern Ireland used to be like. And it is a very different place than it was in 1972, 1982, 1992. We're in a different dispensation. And if everybody was to put their focus into the reconciliation piece, and unfortunately what we're seeing is young people still getting sucked into republicanism and loyalism and being recruited into organisations which still exist, which is a failure on our part. And unless we deal with that now systemically, then there's no conversation to be had in terms of changing the constitutional status of Northern Ireland. We have to make Northern Ireland work.
Well, would you go to an Ireland's Future event if you were invited?
I wouldn't at this stage at all, because I want to see Northern Ireland work, and I want those parties who are pro-union to have that engagement that we see and that same energy into making Northern Ireland work.
OK, Gavin Robinson, I'm assuming you wouldn't go to an Ireland's Future event if you were invited?
No, I wouldn't go at any stage. I wouldn't go. I wouldn't agree to go outside of an election and then hide in barriers on a ghost train for fear of spooking potential electors during an election. I wouldn't go. And let me just answer on behalf of unionism, as the leader of unionism, this question. I'm not sure why we were left to the end in coming to us. But on reconciliation,
being fair and giving everybody
on reconciliation, I am afraid I don't agree with John when he says Sinn Féin have not been found wanting. I believe they have when they bring forward platitudes and non-apologies and don't recognise the hurt that they are responsible for. But that is a separate question to the constitutional future. And as a unionist, I can say this is a boring repetition of an aspiration which has gained no traction whatsoever over the last 25 years. The combined vote for nationalism, and since then, the combined vote of nationalism and republicanism within Northern Ireland has not grown one bit in 25 years. So it's not gaining traction. But I know even beyond, as a unionist, the idea of having a casual or a polite or an engaging conversation about this issue, about severing my own country, is about as attractive as having a polite conversation about severing my own leg. But let me say very clearly to those who mightn't vote unionist, there are many in Northern Ireland who mightn't vote for unionist parties, but they believe and benefit strongly from the United Kingdom. They prosper in their families. They trade and they live and they move and they work right throughout our United Kingdom. And for them, the potential of 60 million people, over 6 million people, is of benefit to them and their families. And as a part of what was the European Union, we are benefiting and growing economically better than any other major economy within the European Union as well.
Look, it's important to say that this conversation is not about patronising or undermining either Gavin or any unionist's view that their future would be better kept with a union with Britain. But the point is that with the Good Friday Agreement, we have the ability to determine our own future. This is what this conversation is rooted in, is having the ability to do that for ourselves. And whether people like it or not, there's been huge societal change here over the past number of years. We see that in electoral results, we see that in census results, we see that in opinion polls. And what we are calling for, if I could finish on this point, what we are calling for is to prepare. Because unlike the disaster of Brexit was to find out the detail after it's voted for, we want to prepare in a responsible way in advance of responsible and mature constitutional change.
Bobby, I'll let you come in here now.
Yeah, I think there are a number of factors that have been drawn out in this conversation. I don't think the conversation on nationalism and republicanism is well enough developed because they haven't got an agreed point. From unionism, it's not something that's attractive to us at all, and it is our job to make Northern Ireland work. But we do need to do that reconciliation point. It has to be addressed, even outside of this conversation, because if we repeat the sins of the past, we've seen murders since 1998. Two of my ex-colleagues, Davy Black and the attempted murder of Adrian Ismay. So if that was avoidable, and it was avoidable in the past.
From nationalism?
Well, we want to see people owning up for the responsibilities of their actions and saying sorry, because we fail our young people if we legitimise the sins of the past.
OK, Naomi Long.
I think it's really important to say that, first of all, I wasn't hiding. I was out campaigning, and if others haven't the time to spend with their party candidates doing that campaign, I think that's unfortunate. But from my perspective, what's really clear, Gavin may be right that the combined nationalist vote has not increased in a long time, but since 2016 and since the Brexit that he and his colleagues championed, what has increased are those voters who are voting Alliance, who are non-aligned. And I think it's important to recognise that those people have come to Alliance independence, largely because they feel that the unionist parties collectively have been abandoning their views and that they are not being heard. There are more and more people out there, both unionist, nationalist and those who are neither, who actually want to deal with the day-to-day issues, the stuff that matters in terms of how they pay their bills, in terms of where their children go to school, how long they'll be on a hospital waiting list. And whilst they are happy for us to prioritise those issues and are voting alliance because we prioritise those issues, they are not objecting to us engaging in another conversation about longer term aspirational issues. And I think to describe either of the constitutional settlements in the kind of very negative and dismissive way that Gavin has is insulting to a huge section of the electorate.
Okay, Colin Eastwood speak. No, let Colin Eastwood speak, please.
Well, I get what Naomi's saying, but I suppose at some point, Naomi, you're going to have to take a position on this, and I just don't think it really is.
You bring me the proposition, and we'll be happy to take a position on the proposition.
But you're a politician, you're a political leader.
Yeah.
Political leaders have to lead people into positions. Now, for me, I want to see us as part of the European Union again. That ain't going to happen as part of the United Kingdom.
Well,
that's
your
just a
sister party
reality.
in Labour that you've been touting all along have been saying that they actually want to have closer alignment with the European Union.
They're not saying we want to be in the European Union, because we know that the British political system will not do that.
Even if Northern Ireland, Ireland was able to re-enter the European Union, there would still be trade friction within these islands. And so what we want is for these islands to be back in the European Union.
Gavin Robinson says this is a boring conversation.
Oh, well, it might be boring for Gavin, but there's lots of people engaged in this conversation now because they do want to be part of the European Union. They want these islands to be reconciled. They want a better economy. Just look over at the border at what's going on down there. And I don't think actually it is sustainable for anybody charged with political leadership to stay out of this debate for very much longer. And I hope Naomi and others come onto the pitch and have
a
position.
We're not out of the debate,
but you are out of the debate.
We're part of the debate.
Robbie Butler, let me go to Robbie Butler, please. Let me go to Robbie. You need to get involved in this conversation, don't you?
I don't think so, but I do think the Alliance Party is probably constitutionally not being honest in some ways, because the party may not have a position, but their members certainly will have, and I've had some conversations, and those are private conversations, and that will inform the debate. We have a position. The nationalist parties have a position, and I do think the Alliance Party are probably...
And I've been very open in saying there are unionist, nationalists and others in Alliance.
I would agree with Colin on this point. It is not okay to abdicate your responsibility in this, because we have seen the mess of Brexit, and it is right and appropriate to take a position. I'm a unionist. I will always be a unionist. I believe our future is best within...
Can you respect my position?
I totally can, but I think it's unfair. But respect me too. No, I believe it's unfair and it's not right. I think it's a conversation that is happening within the Alliance, by the way. I really do. But I think that's what people want to know. I'm being honest about it, and people know where we stand.
OK. Gavin Robinson, I know you wanted to say something briefly. It's
the repetitive nature of an aspiration which I don't share, which we're always been encouraged to engage in. But you know what? It's not for me. That's not disrespectful. That's not something that we'll dismiss. But it's certainly not something that we are actively engaged in. What are we about? It's about making Northern Ireland work. It's about bringing stability, not this division that people in Northern Ireland are getting pretty tired of. This cyclical.
I'm going to go to Robbie Butler. We're wrapping up now. Robbie Butler, just 10 seconds, please, from all of you, just to wrap this up. Robbie.
I think when people watch this tonight, they will want change. They will not want more of the same. So on the 4th of July, they have the chance to bring change and positive politics in Northern Ireland.
We're very committed to positive politics, to delivery on the ground for the people who vote for us, and that's what we will be taking into this election. A vision for reform of our institutions and our finances.
Call me so briefly.
Well, look, the bottom line is this is a Westminster election, and if you're not there, you don't count. That's why it's important to send hard work on SDLP MPs.
John Finucane.
I think the people want to see their politicians working together. They want to see that collective effort to deliver on the issues that matter, and Sinn Féin MPs will be there at the forefront for that.
Gavin
we want to build on the progress that we have achieved to date, fully restore Northern Ireland's place within the United Kingdom and make Northern Ireland work.
Thank you all very much. We must end it there. Just before we go, another reminder that you can see a list of all of the candidates standing in all 18 constituencies in Northern Ireland. Just search UTV News and we will have interviews with senior figures from the other parties on this week's View from Stormont. That's on Thursday at 10:45. Our debate now continues online. Nathan Hanna will be analysing what we've just heard with our political editor Tracy McGee and other commentators. You'll find that straight away on ITVX. For now, though, from all of us on the UTV Election Debate, thanks for watching. Good evening.